Okay, I'm so sorry we're getting a very late start. We've been having quite a little audio issues. Can everybody hear me and see my screen? If you could just write a quick yes or no in the chat, that would be very helpful. Just want to make sure everybody can see the slides. It looks like they are able to see the slides. So we're going to make a quick introduction. So again, I want to welcome you. We did not resolve all our audio technical issues, so we will be sending out some links to the videos that Wendy was trying to be able to share with her presentation today. But with that, I want to welcome Wendy, who is the Education Program Consultant for Autism at the Iowa Department of Education, where she has over 8 years of experience supporting statewide capacity building efforts to support educators and providers in the areas of autism and social emotional competencies. She's a speech language pathologist who specializes in autism spectrum disorders and has over 27 years experience working with individuals with disabilities and their families in a variety of settings, including pediatric rehabilitation and diagnostics, early intervention, public school systems, and non-public or special school settings. We'll be sending out an email for CMEs, CEs, and there are some handouts in your in the box here that you'll be able to download or upload to your own computer. So be sure to get those. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the screen over to Wendy. Thank you.
Thanks, Rochelle. We apologize, everybody, for the technical difficulties. So I'm just going to be a little bit rushed and truncated, and unfortunately, none of the videos that I was going to be showing you are going to be working for us today. So we'll try to send those links, like Michelle said, so maybe you can watch them at another time. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to get us moving so that hopefully we can at least cover some of the content. And I am going to turn this off for now, and I'll join back in a minute. All right. So I don't need to do introductions or background because Rochelle so generously already provided that. So there's just a quick disclaimer in here that I'll draw your attention to. In terms of the terms child with autism, child with ASD, autistic child, child on the autism spectrum, they are used interchangeably throughout this presentation. Some members of the autism community prefer one term while others prefer another. So I intend to respect the different opinions within the community on the use of this language and do not intend to endorse any particular preference. So I just want to set that ahead of time so you understand why we are using these words interchanging. All right, so in today's webinar, I'm going to briefly talk about the brain science and early development, what is autism, the defining autism, the early signs of social communication delays and or autism, and then the importance of early intervention. So let's start with brain science and early childhood development. As many of you know, a baby's brain is developing the most rapidly during the first 3 years of life, when more than 1 million new neural connections are formed every second. The basic architecture of the brain is constructed through an ongoing process that begins before birth and continues well into adulthood. Both genes and then the experiences a child has during this time will help shape the architecture of their brain and build the connections that allow them to develop lifelong skills like problem solving, relationship building, language or communication, skills that will allow them to thrive in their family, community, and schools. So this is where I had a video that I was going to be showing you that really shows the science behind this how a serve and return interaction really shapes brain circuitry. But I'll talk about it, and then we'll have to send you the link for you to watch it on your own. It's a really great video. But one of the most essential experiences in shaping the architecture of the developing brain is what I just mentioned, the serve and return interaction, or something we call reciprocal interaction. And this happens between the child and significant adults in their lives. Babies and young children naturally will reach out for interaction with other people through babbling or facial expressions and gestures. And then adults will respond with the same kind of vocalizing and gesturing back to them. So the baby interacts and the adult responds. And so it's this back and forth serve and return interaction. And this interaction is what actually forms the neural connections in the brain, turns on the brain for learning and interacting, and develops a foundation that is so critical for development. And so, like I said, please watch this video. It really does a nice job explaining that, and I'm not going to take the time to do it now. I'll let you watch that video, but it really is a critical component of development. But what if social interaction and engagement with others and this serve and return interaction that we just talked about, and that hopefully you'll watch in the video, is critical for building the foundation of brain development. So we know this, but what if for some infants and toddlers, some genetic differences, such as what we would experience with autism spectrum disorder, make it more difficult for caregivers to engage them in this reciprocal interaction? So what I'd like to do is explore how we can recognize some of these developmental differences, and then what we can do to minimize the impact they have on brain development. So before we go on, let me quickly just describe what is autism spectrum disorder. What does that look like? So autism spectrum disorder, or autism, is a brain-based developmental disorder that affects an individual's ability to relate and socialize with others and to effectively communicate verbally and or non-verbally. It also is accompanied by restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, or activities. The symptoms of ASD are typically evident in early childhood, before age 3, and it is considered a lifelong diagnosis. But the autism experience is different for everyone. It is defined by these certain set of behaviors, but it's often referred to as a spectrum condition because it affects people differently and to varying degrees. According to the CDC, it is estimated that about 1 in 44 children have been identified with autism. 1 in 44. However, with appropriate early intervention, many children with ASD do really well in school, participate in various activities that they enjoy, and can go on to lead productive, inclusive, and fulfilling lives. An experienced professional can make a diagnosis of autism as early as 18 months of age. However, many children do not receive a final diagnosis until they are much older. Some people are not diagnosed until they're adolescents or adults. Excuse me. This delay means that people with ASD may not get the early help that they need to really shape that brain architecture. So what are some of these early signs of social communication delays and or autism? How can we recognize what that looks like in infants and toddlers so that we can be sure that we are putting the right supports in place to really help shape that brain architecture? Well, the signs and symptoms of autism in toddlers can look very different than they might in older children. Often in infants and toddlers, it is the lack of typical behaviors and developmental milestones that are really the first red flags, rather than the presence of atypical behaviors or unusual behaviors. So it is important to not only recognize that what those atypical behaviors might look like in very young children, but also to know what typical development looks like so as to better spot these discrepancies. We know good communication development starts in the first year of life and goes far beyond learning to talk. But often when parents have concerns about the child's development, it's when they're not talking. But there's so much that happens prior to talking, and this is where we need to help people have a better understanding of what those skills and those milestones look like. As you would have saw in the serve and return video, they did demonstrate how so much interaction is happening with a baby before they even utter that first word, and that they learn to socially interact with their parents and caregivers during everyday routines and activities. These skills are what we refer to as key social communication milestones. So most parents and professionals have heard of or know the early motor milestones, that like children should be sitting up around 6 months, crawling at 9 months, and walking at 12 months. However, few parents or professionals know the key early social communication milestones. These are the milestones that offer that critical window into the well-being of infants and toddlers. And these really are the earliest signs of healthy development and school readiness. So what do these look like? So some of these are just a sampling of some of the social communication milestones that we would expect a child to be showing between 9 and 16 months of age. So these are the kinds of things that they should be doing very early, long before you would expect them to be communicating via words. And these social communication milestones provide that foundation that is needed to launch language and learning. So some of these could include eye gaze and facial expressions to share emotion, both enjoyment, interest, as well as frustration or distress. Using their eye gaze and communication to share attention, interest, and ideas. They might use gestures, they might use sounds, they're looking towards a person's face, they are sharing their experiences and communicating their thoughts via gestures, words or sounds, eye gaze, those kinds of things. So those are some of those early social communication milestones. What I want to show you then is, and hopefully this will transition to the website okay, there is an amazing resource that is called Baby Navigator that is available. It's free for all families and professionals to help them really understand what these social communication developmental milestones look like in infants and toddlers. I'll try clicking this link here. If it doesn't take me, I will stop sharing, come back in and share my, my computer screen a different way. So let's see what happens. Now, did you see that change to the website?
No, we don't.
No,
Wendy.
you don't. Okay. I'm gonna change what I'm sharing then. Give me a moment. Okay, now you're seeing not sharing my screen at all, right? Where is it? There, I could, sorry, it wouldn't open. Okay, let's try this. Are you seeing my computer screen now?
We see your power. Okay. Now
Do
we're
you see
seeing the Baby
the website?
Navigator
Okay,
website. Yep.
all right. And I'm gonna hide that so I can see the website. All right, so this is the website that I was referring to. There's a lot of amazing information in this website, but for time's sake, especially since we had such a late start, I'm not gonna go over everything that's available. I'm gonna go over here to the menu and strip down to these social communication growth charts. Now, families can actually register for free to sign up for these social communication growth charts, and they have the ability to kind of prompt them to kind of mark where the child is depending on their age. And so they have really great resources for families, but for professionals, if we just want to have an idea of what these look like, we can select an age range. So let's select maybe that 9 to 10 months. Now it's going to kind of on the website show you what you would be expecting to happen regarding language, play, social interaction, emotional regulation. But what I really like is if you click on the print, the 9 to 10 month milestones, it does bring up a PDF handout that you could print, and you could have these available to share with families or to share with friends, anybody that would need to know what these are. And then it kind of goes through and it really talks about what are the kinds of things that we should be seeing them demonstrate regarding gestures and meanings and sounds and words and social attention and intentional communication. And so these are some amazing resources that are available to anyone. If I go back here, I could click on the 15 to 16 months and I can show you what those look like. So they're going to be a little bit different than what we saw at 9 to 10 months. So now they're kind of using more words and those kinds of things. So this is an amazing resource that really helps you to understand what those social communication developmental milestones should be, and then give you an idea if a child isn't quite meeting those. And I had, well, I'll go back to my PowerPoint. So if I go back here, can you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes. And I did put the link to Baby Navigator in the chat box so everybody could
Awesome. Great.
grab that.
Okay, so I'm going to go from current slide here. Hopefully you're still seeing my slides, correct?
We're still seeing them.
Okay, we're good. So let me go back one. So we were on the Baby Navigator website. All right. So, so now, well, I'll just keep going. I'm sorry we're a little discombobulated today with the lack of being able to get audio to work and the videos to work. So when you have time to really explore a lot of those social communication developmental milestones, and you have an understanding of what we'd be expecting an infant and toddler to do across, that range, anywhere from 0 to 24 months, is what that website will give you that information. So then now that we recognize what we would expect to have, what would be signs or characteristics of autism that might be kind of that red flag that something different is going on? So many people recognize some of the more overt stereotypical behaviors that are often associated with ASD, such as hand flapping or rocking. But when observing young children who may be at risk of ASD, the focus is more often on what they are not doing compared to typically developing children or even those with other developmental delays versus what behaviors they are exhibiting. Symptoms or behaviors associated with ASD are grouped into really these two main domains. That's according to the DSM 5th edition, so the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. We're looking at behaviors related to social communication and social interaction, and then restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior. I'm not going to read all of these to you just for time's sake, but these are the kinds of things we would that could be red flag behaviors or symptoms of autism related to the social communication interaction domain. The limited use of gestures, limited eye contact, share warm, joyful expressions, doesn't respond when someone calls their name, does not draw your attention to things or show you things they're interested in. But in infants and toddlers, these symptoms can be very, very subtle. The repetitive behaviors and restricted interests, this is the one that most people, these are the kinds of behaviors that often most people associate with autism spectrum disorders. Those are the more overt behaviors that people are kind of used to seeing, but that might look very different in a young child. So some of these behaviors might be really subtle, like just that they have a tendency to pay more attention to objects than they do to people. So they may seem like, oh my gosh, look how much they love playing with this toy, but they never direct their attention to the adult in the room with them about how much fun they're having with this toy. All of that joy and that attention is directed to the object. So a lot of times these behaviors just look really, really subtle in infants and toddlers. So another resource, it's in the same family as Baby Navigator, that I think is a amazing resource for both families and professionals alike, is autismnavigator.com. And once again, I'm going to click on that. And since I'm sharing my screen a different way, you should see that. Correct? It went to Autism Navigator website.
It did.
I hope. Right.
Yep,
All
it
right.
did.
So, all right. Once again, there's so many resources here. And what I'm going to draw your attention to are the courses, the ones that are free for everyone. So there are some paid courses or courses that you can purchase, but the ones that are free for everyone are amazing and doesn't cost anything, right? So this one in particular, the Autism Navigator about autism in toddlers, if I were to click on Get Started, it's going to ask you to sign up if I want to start the course. This is just, well, I'm already signed in, so it's going to. All right. So, but normally to sign in, I had already signed in, so it went ahead and started playing you didn't hear that video sound, did you?
No, we didn't.
Oh, all right, that's all right. Just hoping some miracle happened. But the whole course is amazing. What I wanted to show you today, and this is where I recommend you go. So if you get into about autism in toddlers, there's down here in the bottom right corner, there's this little menu, and that's where I am. I'm in the menu. Video 5 and 6 really show those differences with typical development versus early signs of ASD. And so if I click on pair 1, we're going to see Charlie at 16 months, and then we're going to see Luke at 16 months. And I think I am going to just briefly play these videos, even without sound. I'll try to kind of narrate some of the things that we're seeing, and just so you can get an idea of what these side-by-side videos are like and how they really help you to kind of hone in on those subtle differences that infants and toddlers with autism will have in terms of showing that their concern and something we need to be addressing. So I'm just going to play a little bit. So this is Charlie, which I'm going to mute so I don't have to hear her talking. But you'll see Charlie, they're playing with bubbles. He's looking at the parent who's blowing the bubbles. And you see lots of sharing of his enjoyment. In a minute, he's going to try to pop them. They're going to give him the bubbles back. I'm going to let him keep going for a second. And so now that's a clinician he's sharing eye contact with. He's kind of talking to the clinician, making sounds, going, I can't get this open. Can I open it? And the mom said, it's stuck. And then he kind of imitates stuck right there. And he's his approximation to the word. So he's looking back and forth between all different people there, trying to get them to help them open those bubbles again because he wants those bubbles. So you can see how he's really engaging the people in the environment, not just the object. So now I'm going to show you. Oh, I don't know what just came up. Okay. So Luke is also interested in the bubbles, and he's not showing any overt behaviors that might make you think, oh my gosh, I'm seeing autism. But he's just very, very kind of reserved. He's not engaging with the people, so he's kind of focused on the bubbles. Here, he's going to give the bubbles to the clinician as kind of a give gesture of, I want you to open this, with brief eye contact. You'll see that here in just a moment. So it's not like he's completely unaware of people in his environment, but his interaction, when you compare it to what we just saw with Charlie, is so much more minimal. And he's got a really flat affect there too. That would be another concerning behavior. He's not really sharing that enjoyment. He's just kind of focused in on that object. And so these are the videos that would be available to you. These are in the free About Autism in Toddlers, and they are just amazing at really helping you to kind of hone in on those subtle differences between typical development and early signs of autism. They also show Charlie and Luke at a year later, so you can kind of see how that developed and how that progressed. Where is Charlie now, and then where is Luke now? And one of the things that they point out that you'll see in Luke is that what seemed very subtle at 15 months is pretty pronounced by 28 months, that we're seeing a lot of signs and symptoms of autism, and he is pretty unresponsive to people in his environment. So it had this, what we call this cascading effect on his development. All right, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint.
And we can see it.
All right, we're good then. So the brain science video really kind of talked about the importance of that serve and return. So please watch that, because I think it's really critical to understanding brain development in infants and toddlers. But it really kind of showed that paying attention to people and engaging in reciprocal social interaction is critical to brain architecture. But as you can see from these, as you will see from the videos that when you have a chance to watch them, that infants and toddlers with characteristics of autism, because they can be so focused on the objects or so unaware kind of the people in their environment, that they're just not attending to those people, and they're having limited serve and return interactions, which can have a cascading effect on the development, on brain development. So often in toddlers, we see what we will call an unfolding of symptoms of autism. At 12 months, the symptoms may be subtle and easy to miss the untrained eye, and a toddler might just appear to be quiet or minimally engaged with others in his environment, like we kind of saw with Luke. But because he is not engaged and not paying attention to the important information in the learning environment, the child may begin to exhibit increasing deficits in social communication and brain development, so that by 2 years of age, he's exhibiting a lot more obvious signs of autism, such as delayed language or limited nonverbal communication or lack of social reciprocity, and maybe even the beginning of some repetitive behaviors. This is why early diagnosis is so critical, because the core features of autism really can have that cascading effect on development and learning. Because of the autism, they often miss out on these critical interactions, these back and forth serve and return interactions that form the foundation for development. But that's not to say that there's no hope, right? So research has shown that for autistic toddlers, parent implemented interventions starting at 18 months leads to significantly greater outcomes than previous practices of waiting to start clinician-driven interventions when they're older, like 2 years or even later. So what do we mean by early intervention? So across the country, families can access services for their infants and toddlers under 3 years of age who are not developing as expected or who have medical condition that might delay typical development through this federally funded program known as Early Intervention, or IDEA Part C. Now, there are certainly other pediatric therapy type places that families can receive services, but there is this federal program known as Early Intervention, or IDEA Part C. In Iowa, this federal program is known as Early Access. And Early Access focuses on helping parents and other caregivers support their child's growth and development during everyday routine activities. So the providers go into a family's home and they work with the family, they work with the caregivers to help them learn how to best help their child. Early access providers focus on what we call family-guided routine-based intervention and caregiver coaching. So through this FGRBI, family-guided routine-based intervention, care and caregiver coaching, the early intervention providers will coach caregivers to engage their young children in learning. So they will teach them strategies to help keep them engaged and help them to participate in everyday routines and activities that will be meaningful to the family and also help the child learn. So some of those everyday activities might be play, it might be reading books, but it might also be snack time, meal time, bath time, washing hands, toileting, dressing, maybe doing household chores, helping with the laundry. There's so many things that we do on a day-to-day basis that if we can kind of coach caregivers to know how they can embed strategies to foster development within those activities, we're going to have a bigger impact. And so that's kind of what this analogy with the marble is all about. Why not just, why do we focus on the family or the caregivers? Why not just provide therapy for the child? Well, if we kind of think of the traditional approach, so the single marble on the left represents an hour a week that a family may have with an early intervention provider, which is kind of it's kind of a standard across the country of what many families will get for early intervention for their child until their child enters preschool. So that 0 to 3 timeline, if they're enrolled in the federally operated Part C programming, they might get like an hour, maybe up to 3 hours a week with different providers of early intervention services. The jar on the right has the 167 marbles, which represents the additional, or the 167 hours that might go by until the child's next intervention session. So what matters most is the time that a family has between intervention sessions, right? So if the intervention is only there once a week, that's one marble. We have 167 other marbles that we could be making an impact. And so that's where it's important for parents and caregivers to be coached so that they can make that bigger difference in their child's success than an interventionist who can only come in for an hour a week. So how does this impact infants and toddlers who are at risk for autism? Well, research indicates that for autistic children, we should spend at least 25 hours a week actively and productively engaged in meaningful learning activities to improve outcomes. Now, can you imagine having, I mean, it's pretty daunting for a family of an infant and toddler to have therapists come into their home or a interventionist come into their home for 25 hours a week. That's pretty intrusive. But if we can coach the child, what matters is that how the child is engaged in learning from moment to moment and activity to activity. So if we can coach the caregiver to know how they can be making that difference, if we spend that time, that interventionist who comes in 1 hour a week spends their time training, coaching, and teaching the family what they can do to help their child, we're going to have that bigger impact. So to help early access providers know how to best serve families of autistic children, we introduced the Autism Navigator for Early Access Providers project. So we began this project in 2015, and we are just beginning enrollment for year 8 of this project. And over the last 7 years, we have been implementing Autism Navigator for Iowa's early access providers. We have had a total of 330 early access providers across the state, and all 9 AEAs enroll in the Knowledge and Skills course. The primary focus of the course and the project is to help early access providers first recognize those early warning signs. So the little snippet of the videos that I showed you in the free course, it's much more comprehensive in the provider professional course. And then so we're wanting them to recognize those early warning signs of social communication delays and or autism, and then to coach caregivers to embed strategies, evidence-based strategies, to foster active engagement into their everyday routines and activities. So in Autism Navigator, they really kind of focus on promoting that concept of active engagement. And then they will show you, so here's what we want the child to be doing, the active engagement component, and here are the supports the adult can provide to promote that level of active engagement. So there's kind of, they kind of refer to it as a layered cake. So step 1 is really coming together. This is where a child is going to be well regulated and productive and socially connected. And then on that right-hand column are the activities and the things that an adult does to ensure that a child is regulated, productive, and socially connected. And then we move to step 2. So once we've got, so you can't build a layer cake by starting in the middle layer, right? We've got to have that first layer in place, then you build on that. So the second step, once we are well regulated, productive, and socially connected, then they can begin to look at faces and be responsive to bids for attention. So begin to have that reciprocal interaction. They can begin initiating directed communication. And then the transactional supports, the things the adult does, are on that right-hand side. That's what they can do to really promote that level of active engagement. Then after we have, they're regulated, they're keeping it together, they've come together, keeping it together, then that's where we start seeing more flexible generative language and that really skill growth type levels. So we have to kind of be thinking about what can we do as an adult to promote active engagement for this child in all different kinds of activities. They have a plethora of resources that they could share with, that we could share with families, providers who go through the training. This is one of the kind of data collection pieces where they kind of on the left-hand side, again, looking at the active engagement, where the child is. On the right-hand side, what are the supports that the parent is providing. And then you can see in these little things across the top, there's at least 5 different slots for different activities. So maybe we're looking at active engagement and what the parent is doing for mealtime and for playtime and for bath time and for doing the laundry and for washing their hands, whatever those activities might be. And then we're kind of looking at how actively engages the child in this interaction, what is the parent doing to be able to support active engagement. And then we can kind of leave these for the families to kind of as homework. And here's, down here below, say, okay, well, this is where they were on this one. So next time for this activity, we really want to get the child to this level of active engagement. So here are the things that you can do to help support. So there's some guiding, there's some coaching, there's some modeling that happens with the interventionist to help the parent know what they can do. And then when they come back next time, they look to see where they are and how things have been going. And I know I'm getting close on time. So once again, these websites, didn't have time to explore them, but I highly recommend, I've got them in the resources at the end. I highly recommend you get in there, spend some time. There are, like I said, there are some paid courses in the Autism Navigator series in particular. Everything on Baby Navigator is free, but there are also free courses. So I encourage you to get in there and check those out. And then, whew, marathon of trying to get all of that done in this amount of time. Do we have any questions?
And you did a great job. Thank you so much, Wendy. That was some excellent information. I'm sure everybody appreciated it. We had a great audience. 85 folks attended, and I encouraged them a couple times to add some questions into the question box.
Okay.
And I want to see if anybody's done that.
Okay.
And I don't see any, but you still have time, folks, if you want to write in a couple questions. And if we don't have time before you have to sign off, I will definitely get the questions to Wendy, she can answer them, and I'd get them to you in a handout.
Absolutely.
I did upload the handouts. They're in the handouts in the box there that you can upload right now to your computer. All the links to the videos are in the chat box. I will hand out all of these things when I send out your email within a couple of days, along with the recording. So if you want to review the recording and then stop and listen to those and actually go to the links for those videos, you could do it at that time. Again, I can't apologize enough for the audio issue, and we'll make sure that doesn't happen again. We might have to change platforms. As Wendy said, she prefers Zoom, so we might have to take her up on
Everybody has
that.
their own thing. I just know that I didn't have issues with it on Zoom, and all of a sudden we can't get it to go on this one. So I felt really bad about that. So I apologize to everybody.
And I still don't see any. Okay. Oh, we do have a few questions.
Great.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Is early access provided through the area education offices?
Yes. So if you, let me go back, don't get dizzy. And the hand up, right, Iowa Family Support Network, that's a website, and that's where you can learn more about early access in Iowa. And that is where, if you have a family that you want to refer to early access, there's a referral link on that website. So families can go, or so providers or families can go to this website and they can get that referral. But yes, early access is provided through the AEA, so it is kind of part of the education system. In other states, early intervention isn't necessarily through the education system, but in Iowa it is, which is nice because it makes for a good transition into the preschool and early childhood special education if it's needed for that child or family. But the Iowa Family Support Network is the best place to kind of learn more about early access. And if you have a referral that you'd like to make, or families want to explore what that might mean for them, they can do that there.
Okay. Can autism be late onset? Is autism related to trauma-based occurrence at all?
Autism, in terms of what we know, how it's defined in Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, is that it is early onset. So if there is something that happens late onset, it may not qualify as autism, because that is part of the defining characteristics of autism in the DSM in order for it to be diagnosed as autism. But can individuals who've had trauma or who've had other types of things happen, for some like Rett's and it's kind of, it looks like autism early on, but then it's actually something different, right? And they have more of that loss of skills over time. But it technically shouldn't be diagnosed as autism unless there was that early onset, because that is built into the diagnosis in the 5. What often happens is that, like you briefly saw in a little bit of the video, sometimes those early signs are so subtle people missed it. And especially for our higher functioning individuals with autism, they may be developing language. People aren't seeing that there are delays per se, so they're not recognizing those social communication delays that may be present in early, in infancy before age 3 to get that diagnosis of autism, but it was subtle enough that people missed it, especially because they didn't have significant delays in other areas. So a lot of times that's what's happening with what we think is this delayed onset of autism. Sometimes those symptoms have always been there, they just were missed because they were subtle.
Do children with ASD typically start in the school system sooner?
In Iowa, we don't have you don't have to have a diagnosis to get started in special education should you need special education services. So there's not, but what is helpful with getting that diagnosis of autism as early as possible is that kind of gives all of those that are working with that child a roadmap of what we need to be looking for and what are going to be those priority intervention strategies that we need to put in place. What are the evidence-based practices that are going to best serve this child? And so it doesn't necessarily mean that they're automatic. So if they get a diagnosis of autism at the age of 3, by the time they reach kindergarten, they are not showing any delays that are affecting their development and learning, and so they're not needing specially designed instruction. They can be in a regular classroom without having to have special education services. So it doesn't automatically mean they're going to get special education services. It's dependent upon their development and their needs. But it does help us to know as interventionists and the families to know just roadmap for the future and things to be watching for. Sometimes our young children might be in the early ages, you know, they show those signs, they do really well, they respond very well to intervention, and then by the time they reach kindergarten, they're like, oh, we don't need this label anymore, it's all good, you know. But then as they reach like 4th grade, they start having some difficulties maybe with reading. A lot of times that's something that they might be okay with the decoding aspect, but then when they get to the comprehension, they start having more challenges. So a lot of times it's just helpful to have that fuller picture of that whole child approach, what's happening with this child and how can we best support them moving forward. So I hope I answered that question.
We're going to go ahead and stay on the line. I've got a few more questions. Is that all right with you, Wendy?
That's fine with me, yeah.
And I'll still make sure I get a handout in case some folks had to leave right at 1 o'clock. But
yes,
we
I'll
did
just
have
let
a
you know that
question.
the references are here, their websites. There are journal articles that can be helpful for understanding these things. So I kind of briefly showed that earlier, but for those who have to jump off, just know that that's available to you. Those resources are on that slide handout as well.
So we have a question about my daughter just had twins, born 24 weeks. They're about a month old now, and there's some concern about developmental delays. What's the best thing they could do right now?
The best thing they can do right now is if they haven't, if they live in Iowa or whatever state they live in, is to make sure they get connected with early intervention. So whether if it's in Iowa, there'll be early access. Premature babies are often have that, depending on how early they are, and I think if you said 24 weeks, they may have that automatically eligible because of the medical condition that they have. So in Iowa, not every state is like this, but in Iowa we do have some, if we have a certain diagnosed medical conditions that automatically qualify you for early intervention or early access, or you're showing a certain percentage of delays, and that would qualify you as well. So, but I definitely get plugged in because if nothing else, they can be doing some monitoring, right? They can be monitoring and making sure that development is happening, that there's not some point in which they're needing some additional support and the families are needing some additional support to make sure that they are growing and learning as they should. So, so that would be number one. And the other thing is, it would be really helpful to look at that Baby Navigator website and especially look at those social communication growth charts. And you can, parents can sign up for free, and they have a monitoring process that they will kind of send you every 3 months or every month, a reminder to kind of look and see where are they meeting those milestones, and just kind of help you to keep. And that's a really good thing to share with your doctor and with your early intervention providers if you have them, to kind of just make sure everyone's on the same page, understanding where they are in their development. So those are 2 things I'd recommend doing right away.
Any tips for resources for children not diagnosed and are older?
Well, that's kind of a really broad question. Are they looking for, I guess it would depend if you're looking for diagnostics, like you're wanting that diagnosis, or are you looking for intervention strategies? So, you know, there's some great national resources out there that might just kind of help guide a little bit, like Autism Society of Iowa and Autism Society of America both have some really great that might be available to kind of help figure out what might be available to you. If you go to Autism Society Iowa, you would know Iowa specific resources. And so they're kind of a great repository for a lot of different information that might kind of help guide you in that process. If they're struggling in school, you can always try to talk with the school personnel and or the AEA folks and try to see about getting some additional supports that way. So it's kind of depends on what the need is, but I would start with those kind of national websites that might give you some guidance as to where to start and where to go.
And I might add that the Regional Autism Assistance Program
Yeah,
is available.
yes,
Yeah,
that's
you don't
another
need
great
a
table, a
diagnosis.
specific one.
Yep, you don't need a diagnosis if you have a
You don't
concern.
need a diagnosis to get
Uh,
support. That's right.
yeah, so they would certainly make sure you get your questions answered, and also if you'd like to have family navigation services, they'd be happy to help with that too. So looks like I think we've gone through.
Okay.
I think there is a question here. It kind of, the first of it got kind of cut off, but I think what they're trying to ask is if parents aren't specifically looking necessarily for an evaluation, do you have any other thoughts on what they could do?
Right. So, I do think, like I said, that Baby Navigator website, even though like it shows the social communication growth charts only go up to 24 months, and say the child is 3, but that doesn't mean that you can't look at what should they be doing at 24 months and determine, is my 3-year-old doing that? So sometimes looking at those kinds of things is a really great place to start to kind of understand where the child is, where there might be some opportunities for growth, and depending on if the person asking is a parent, that's going to give you that information that you need. If the person asking is a provider, and you're just wanting, how do I launch this conversation with this family? They're not ready to go to that diagnostic realm, but how do we begin talking about where the child is, the strengths that they have, where there's opportunities for growth, and what supports we need to put in place to make sure that we're having the greatest impact and setting them up for success. So I do recommend that that Baby Navigator. You can look at, there's more than just, I didn't have time to show you everything on there, but they also have lookbooks that kind of demonstrate what those behaviors and what those milestones should look like. And then there's lots of videos that show those comparison videos as well. So it's a great place to start, and it's a great it's a tool that we often use in building consensus with families to kind of get everybody on the same page and understanding the child and then the supports that they need.
Okay, I think I want to thank everybody again for sticking it out. We had a great turnout, even though we had such a long delay. And I really want to thank Wendy for her patience in all this, and what a great
No
presentation. We
problem.
have a lot of nice comments in the box about and how much they enjoyed the presentation. And just a reminder that in the next 48 hours, we'll be getting out the information for you to be able to claim your CMEs. So again, thank you, and hope to see you next Autism Learning Community webinar. Thank you, everybody.